An examination of a cerebral narcissist, part 2. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, continuing to explain to you the behaviours of both a narcissist and one that's cerebral to help you understand more about the way that a person of that cadre behaves. Agnes and Ben shared a divorce lawyer, and their divorce was finalised within 3 weeks of her introducing the idea. Notice the undue haste that's exhibited here, the necessity of asserting control through the divorce. Ben said, "I think to an unusual degree, Agnes sort of lives what she thinks and thinks what she lives." Agnes and Arnold struggled to do their work. Almost every day they went out for coffee together and had long conversations about philosophy, monopolization of time, mirroring, cerebral activity, which felt like the real work. In accordance with university guidelines, they had declared their desire to have a relationship to the chair of the philosophy department, and Agnes recused herself from academic authority over Arnold. Sometimes it seemed to Agnes that the universe had been prearranged for her benefit, magical thinking. If she and Arnold were taking a walk together and she craved a croissant, a bakery would suddenly appear, magical thinking. If she needed a book, she would realise that she was passing a bookstore, and the text she wanted was displayed in the window, magical thinking. She thought that this was now her permanent reality. Arnold said that, the first time Agnes's sons came to his apartment, "I remember watching them play on the furniture, and suddenly realising, this is the point of furniture." Pretentious nonsense. And with Agnes it was the same sort of thing. The world of a relationship has all sorts of furniture in it, the things you do and say, and all of the conventions. But with Agnes, for the first time, I felt like it had some kind of point. News of the divorce reached her students, and Agnes worried that they would feel disoriented or betrayed. Potential threats to control. That term, she had been invited to be the keynote speaker at an undergraduate conference for philosophy students. Opportunity to assert control, possibly manage facade, and of course cerebral activity. She decided to give her talk about what had happened to her: self-absorption, sense of entitlement, vanity. It was titled, "On the Kind of Love into Which One Falls, Grandiosity, Self-Absorption." Ben read drafts of the talk in advance and gave her feedback. He and Arnold sat next to each other in the front row. 6.5 weeks ago, I fell in love for the first time. That, of course, is grandiosity and belittles the relationship that she had with her husband, ex-husband. "You did not think I was a person who would subject her children to divorce. You did not think I was a person who would be married to someone she had not fallen in love with. You are not sure whether you know me any more." Attempt at portraying herself as a complex individual, grandiosity, self-absorption. She told her students that she felt she had a professional obligation to clarify the situation, grandiosity. Philosophers often describe love from the outside, but she could provide an inside account. Notice how special and superior she is. Her experience had prompted her to reinterpret a famous speech in the symposium in which Socrates, whom she considers her role model, grandiosity, argues that the highest kind of love is not for people, but for ideals. She was troubled by Socrates' unerotic and detached view of love, and she proposed that he was actually describing how two lovers aspire to embody ideals together. True lovers, she explained, don't really want to be loved for who they are. They want to be loved because neither of them is happy with who he or she is. Grandiosity, self-absorption. One of the things I said very early on to my beloved was this: I could completely change now. Promise change, she recounted. Radical change, becoming a wholly other person, is not out of the question. There is suddenly room for massive aspiration. After the talk, a colleague told Agnes that she was speaking as if she thought she were Socrates. Character trait acquisition, grandiosity. I was like, yeah, that's what it felt like, she said. I felt like I had all this knowledge. Cerebral grandiosity. And it was wonderful. It was an opportunity to say something truthful about love. In Parallel Lives, a study of 5 couples in the Victorian era, the literary critic Phyllis Rose observes that we tend to disparage talk about marriage as gossip. But gossip may be the beginning of moral inquiry, the low end of the Platonic ladder, which leads to self-understanding, she writes. We are desperate for information about how other people live, because we want to know how to live ourselves. Yet we are taught to see this desire as an illegitimate form of prying. Rose describes marriage as a political experience and argues that talking about it should be taken as seriously as conversations about national elections. Cultural pressure to avoid such talk as gossip ought to be resisted in a spirit of good citizenship. Agnes views romantic relationships as the place where some of the most pressing philosophical problems surface in life: grandiosity, cerebral view. And she tries to navigate the moral opprobrium's reflexes in the right way, she said, so that people won't dismiss the topic as unworthy of public discussion. If you're a real philosopher, grandiosity, dismissiveness, she once tweeted, you don't need privacy, because you're a living embodiment of your theory at every moment, even in your sleep, even in your dreams. Grandiosity. Jonathan Lear, a philosopher at the University of Chicago, said that Agnes approaches every conversation as if it were integral to her life's work, as if it was for Socrates. She's attempting to live a philosophical life, cerebral approach, and this includes taking responsibility for the very concept of marriage. So here we see the grandiosity that only she, is able to take responsibility for the concept of marriage, notwithstanding the fact that billions of people have engaged in this, currently and through history. Part of what I take to be her bravery is that she is looking around asking, hey, I know all these couples have gotten rings and gone to the courthouse, but are they married? I would see that as rather condescending and dismissive behaviour. One thing you can do with that question is forget all about it and find some deadline to be anxious about. Or you can really hear the question vividly. That's the place where philosophy begins, with a certain anxiety about how to live the life that is yours. Agnes's work, which won the 2020 Lebovitz Prize for Philosophical Achievement, Cerebral Activity, searches for ways in which we can become better selves than we are. She writes philosophy columns for The Point and The Times, Cerebral Activity, and she will agree to a podcast with essentially anyone who asks, regardless of that person's politics or credentials. She also has her own podcast called Minds Almost Meeting, Cerebral Activity, with Robin Hanson, a libertarian-leaning economist with whom she constantly disagrees. I think you are insulting the human race in your book, she told him in one episode. Argumentativeness, need to nullify threat to control. In 2018, when she accidentally got pregnant, she gave a speech about misogyny at a conference of the Eastern American Philosophical Association, Cerebral Activity, then told a room full of philosophers that she was considering having an abortion. I am pregnant and I don't know whether I want to be, she said. Your shock is, of course, why most of those women don't talk about it. Still less does anyone confess to being, at that very moment, engaged in the deliberative activity of weighing the value of a future human life. At a Q&A session with two of the panellists after her talk, no comments were directed towards her. Not long afterward, she had a miscarriage. Arnold saw Agnes's first book, Aspiration, which she began writing the year after they met, in part as an attempt to make sense of their experience of falling in love. This evidences grandiosity in terms of believing that the book would be done in such a way. In the book, which was published in 2018, she describes how philosophers have often scoffed at the idea of self-creation. Nietzsche dismissed the idea that a person could pull oneself up into the existence by the hair out of the swamps of nothingness. But the book argues that people can embark on a path towards a destination, a new way of being a person, that they can't yet see or understand, a process that she calls aspiration. When aspirants make decisions, they are guided by the possibility of a future self that does not yet exist. They imitate mentors or competitors, character trait acquisition and mirroring, risking pretension because they understand that their current values are deficient. They haven't made room for another way of seeing themselves or the world. Arnold came to see the idealism of the early weeks of their relationship as the first stage of aspiration. What we had was an imperfect vision of something, but it pretended to be clear, he told me. Within a few months, they saw that in many ways they were incompatible. Most people, myself included, would have met the realization with the thought, how could I have stepped into this with such naivety, with such childish blindness, he said. But her instinct was to trust that initial experience. Agnes and Arnold married a year after her divorce. Swift wedding, shows sense of entitlement, necessity of assertion of control, at a chapel on campus. Ben gave the toast at the rehearsal dinner. By then, Agnes recognised that she'd oversold her understanding of love to her students. At the time, she thought she'd achieved more than she had. Nevertheless, she said, she'd had enough of a glimpse, a foretaste of future knowledge, to reorganise her life in such a way that a future self would look back and be like, yes, she was on her way. Pretension, grandiosity. I'll continue this examination of a cerebral narcissist in part 3. Join me there as some devaluing behaviours start to manifest.